as you can see here, I changed the title of my presentation. So, I mean, at the end, I just realized that the old one was not actually appropriate to what I'm going to talk here. So I changed to this one, perceptual phenomenology and emptiness. Well, some preliminary remarks. First thing, Bob Hanna wants to put Kant in dialogue with contemporary philosophy. So I feel like I accepted the invitation. So I'm trying to talk with Hanna's Kant. Since I can really sort out Kant from Hanna's Kant, from Hanna himself, decided to create this undifferentiated amalgam of Kant and Hanna. And this is my interlocutor here. I'm under the impression that most of what I'm going to be saying here today is actually not Bob's own views, but Kant's, or his Kant. But anyway, I can't really tell the difference. I mean, I got totally kind of, it became a big blob, and I selected a few things that I'm interested in. So it's not even a real person, so there is no organic entity I'm actually addressing to. There is some kind of bunch of texts. Right? I mean, I do have a lot of preliminary remarks. It's just kind of as a way of excusing myself for later on embarrassing myself and doing some little Kant here. So Hanna introduced me actually to a new Kant, and his Kant is much smarter actually than any Kant I have ever seen. I really think so. I call him Super Kant. Whether or not his Kant is, the historic guy, lived in Königsberg, 18th century, unable to tell. I mean, I am not the one to tell this. Not really interested in this question as well. So I do think that Hanna has a really charitable interpretation. So he brings out this very thought-provoking, updated Kant, and that's the guy I'm going to talk with. So I did my best to understand this new Kant, but I really must confess that after a lot of failed attempts, I just realized that I was really I found myself lost most of the time. So I was trying to see how Kant will address the same questions that I am addressing. And I was particularly puzzled by how Kant's speak got translated into contemporary parlance in Hanna's books. When I say books, I can use the plural because I actually read substantial parts of two of them, and a few papers. And all I read was, initially I thought I had something very clear, and we were actually talking about the very same thing. And at the end I wasn't convinced anymore that actually we are talking about the same thing. And the thing I'm going to be talking here is perceptual content. So I was like, there is something weird here. Now I'm really confused. So my presentation here became, instead of a clear-cut, sharp, addressing and criticism of a certain view, it became more or less, I'm going to present roughly my own view on what perceptual content is. I'm not really going to talk about this conceptual, non-conceptual distinction. That's not something that I'm particularly interested in here. But even the very idea, or the very notion of contentfulness, or just having content, when we talk about conscious perceptual experiences, that seems not to be exactly the same thing that Kant is talking about, or his Kant, whatever. I'm going to use Kant for short. Kant's view, so let me see here. So if I just get it totally wrong, you Kantians in this room, please enlighten me, because I'm probably gonna, at the end I was kind of shortened passage that I was talking about Kant, and I will end up just kind of presenting my view, and there is little Kant, and little Kant comes with things that I understand not very clearly, And I end up just kind of raising questions like, is it what he means? Like, is that what he means? So that's basically what I'm going to do here. Let's go. Firstly, a few things I'm interested in. In this talk, I'm going to be concerned about these two things here, perceptual phenomenology and the cognitive semantic import of perceptual experience. So the first thing is, what explains, determines, fixes, or what kind of thing may explain the qualitative aspect of perceptual experience? Second thing is, what do perceptual experiences make available for thoughts? And here I'm particularly interested in how demonstrative thoughts about perceived objects and properties are grounded in perceptual experiences. I take it to be non-problematic that our ability to refer, be it linguistically or mentally, to particular objects in the world, that it must be grounded in some sort of a thing that we do by means of perception. So it must be grounded in perception somehow. I'm interested in explaining the mechanism, right, or how it happens. So those are the two things I'm going to talk about. Well, I guess it's safe to claim that Kant is also interested in these questions. And I was like, I think so. Initially I was, oh yes, obviously. I mean, let me discuss with Kant about these two things, right? And then I was like, yeah, now I guess it's safe to say. What follows is not so much an attempt to prove my view right and he's wrong, though I surely believe that. But it's mostly a plea for clarification, really. I'm happy if I can get a better grip on how Kant's view relates to mine. Actually, I'm happy with that. What I mean by perceptual experience, so let's go. As I use this term, perceptual experience refers to conscious sensory perception. The consciousness condition here, or the fact that it must be conscious, excludes unconscious dealings with environment, things like blindside or, I'm talking about content of conscious experiences, right? Second thing, it's sensorial. So the sensory condition excludes non-sensorial experiences. This one is trickier. I'm not going to give much of an explanation here, but just think of, there are some other ways or some other experiences that are not specifically sensory experiences. So moods, feelings, or if there is any cognitive phenomenology, so thinking, even imaginings. So those things are excluded. So I'm going to talk about the content of conscious sensory experience. Perceptual experience, in my usage, necessarily has a certain subjective character, constitutes part of the subject's overall conscious state. And here there is something is directly related to what André said here before. He has this notion of, an overall phenomenology. The way we experience the world, we pretty much experience situations, which is just kind of a complex of cognitive, perceptual, and different elements all together. You can tell it. It's not something that's transparent to you phenomenally. I do agree. But I do think, and we talked about that before, I do think that there is a relatively independent contribution of perceptual phenomenology to this overall phenomenology. So it's not like you just put a lot of things together and then boom, you have an overall phenomenology. I think we can explain how part of this phenomenology is pretty much produced through a whole process that involves sensory systems and representational systems, and so there is an explanation for perceptual phenomenology in particular, even though that's not the way we experience the world. It's a kind of a distracted way from the complex. We experience it in a complex way. I'm abstracting an element of it. The term perceptual experience and its cognates are used here as non-success terms, so they include cases of misperception, illusions, hallucinations. As I use the term perceptual experience, it does not necessarily involve the existence of perceived object, nor does it require the obtaining of an appropriate relation between perceiver and perceived object. And here I'm not saying that those are not requirements, conditions for having a veridical experience. I'm just saying that as I use the term, it accepts the fact that you may have an experience with no object, you may have an experience even though you're not properly related to anything, and so on. I guess there is no direct correlate in Kant speak to perceptual experience as I use it. And please correct me if I'm wrong. But we can still calibrate our terms to avoid misunderstanding. Because so far as I understood anything, it seems that when Kant talks about cognitive content, he seems to be using this term, and it includes like empirical elements and stuff. It must be it's a success term, so it can't be just kind of empty, right? So there is this difference. So that's the thing. You build up all these distinctions, and at the end, it's hard to calibrate the vocabulary. So let's see if you can help me. I guess I'm interested here in what fixes the phenomenology of perceptual experience, what they make available to thoughts. Those still, I believe, we may share this interest, even though we phrase these questions differently, right? So, yeah, I am a representationalist. So I'm going to say a few things about what being a representationalist is all about. So I pretty much, my representationalism consists in these three main theses. And they are, first, perceptual experience fundamentally consists in the subject representing her environment as being a certain way. And here, it's of the essence here to have a certain account of what representing is, the representing relation. Second, perceptual experiences are representational states partly individuated by their content, and the content captures the veridicality conditions of that state. So the idea is, what is representational content in this tradition, or how I use this term? We use this term, right? Me and a bunch of people. What is it? Well, just kind of the veridicality conditions of perceptual experience, right? Whatever has an influence in making this experience veridical or not. And the third thing here, so the first key notion in the first thing here is representing. The key notion in the second condition, the second thesis here, is content, representational content. And the third one here, the representational content captures the way that things appear to be according to the experience, fixing its phenomenal character. So, and here is the thesis that's precisely the kind of representationalist contribution to the debate in philosophy of mind. And the key notion here is phenomenal character. So, here is a nice quotation from Dradsky. Representationalist theory provides an answer, biologically plausible one, to questions about the function or purpose of consciousness. These benefits and more derive from conceiving of the mind as the representational face of the brain. To those who are not familiar with this, representationalist tradition in philosophy of mind, it's basically, I'm kind of quoting the founding fathers, which is Dradsky, Michael Tye, a bunch of other people, but it's basically, in the way I'm kind of exposing it, and as I understand this view, it's basically something that was developed in the 90s, and now I think I can say that it is the most popular view in philosophy of mind concerning these questions in the U.S. in certain environments. But I guess it is in philosophy of mind. It's pretty popular. So Kant is talking to contemporary philosophy, right? I'm really trying to make Kant talk to a representationalist, and you're going to see that it's not going to be easy. the representing relation. Here is a quotation from Michael Tye. If optimal or ideal perceptual conditions obtained, sensory states of the sort found in perception track the presence of certain external features, they thereby represent those features. Well, assume certain perceptual system is functioning properly and that it reliably tracks distal features of the environment, assuming that the resultant perceptual states covary under optimal conditions with these features in the environment, it seems plausible to suppose that these perceptual states represent these features or they're about these features. So, of course, the representationalist is a fundamentally intentional theory of perceptual experience. So, here we have an account of what is it to be about, right? A certain feature in the world. And here is the story, right? The view above here, Tye's original view in 95, or any other, there are many actually. This view in particular is not mandatory to representationalists. There are many others available. I mention it only to illustrate the kind of account needed to explain what this representing relation is, right? So we need an account of this kind, right? I mean, there are a lot of people who are now primitivist about that, so actually there is no account. But primitivism is itself kind of account, so it's complicated. But you got to tell a story about that. Here are some rough and ready answers to the questions I'm interested in. Really rough and ready. But let's just kind of overall what a representationalist, or in general representation, or many of them, what they say. What explains the terms fixes qualitative aspect, perceptual experience? Well, it's representational content, or a part of it. So, phenomenal character is equated with fixed by, they have lots of different ways of putting it, representational content, and actually a part of it. Because most representationalists today, they defend some sort of singular perceptual content. So you have the object in there. So it can be the whole perceptual content that actually is equated with phenomenal character. So you have a certain part of it. What do perceptual experiences make available for thoughts? Well, whatever is perceptually represented, or whatever is part of the perceptual content. So you have, when you have a perceptual experience, you are in this mental state that represents a lot of features, and those features, as they are represented, and they're in the, the content, the representational content of this state, the perceptual state you find yourself in. These features, they are actually phenomenally manifest to you in a way, and you can make reference to them, or you can appeal to them in thinking. So that's what they make available for thinking. Possibly, right? Assuming that your thinking process are working fine, you actually want to talk about that, or whatever. Example, suppose I visually experience a red tomato out there. What's perceptually represented? So, saying what's represented, actually it's going to explain both the cognitive import of perceptual experience, because that's what's going to be available for cognitive processes later, thinking, believing, whatever, knowing. So a certain structure, content, including things like a particular tomato, redness, a relative position. So my experience is veridical only if that tomato instantiates property of being red and is located out there, relative position, right? The representational content captures both the veridicality conditions of that experience and its phenomenal character. It looks red, it looks, like a particular object out there, tomato-like, whatever. So that's more or less the story a representationalist tells about, the questions they're interested in. What's made available? Property, certain property, shade of red, a particular object, the tomato, that tomato that you are perceiving, and you can thereby entertain demonstrative thoughts about the location you're going to, oh, it's out there, right? The object you are perceiving and being represented in your experience, the property being represented. So you can have thoughts of this kind, like, oh, this shade of red is darker than that shade of pink, or whatever. So now you have all these elements available for thinking. Now let's take a look at how Kant addresses the same questions. And now I'm going to embarrass myself. How much time I have? It's a good timing, I guess. No, actually, seriously, how much time do you have?
You have what do you want for the discussion? Quanto tempo você quer para a discussão?
I don't know. I mean, depends on people, right? But 10 minutes? 5 minutes?
Já tem 15, 20 minutos,
15,
mais 15
20.
minutos de discussão. Se
Alright,
quiser,
so,
aí você regula.
yeah.
Quer dizer, você tem mais 30 minutos à sua disposição.
I'm going to skip this Kantian part here. Alright. So what fixes perceptual phenomenology for Kant? So I got a few passages from his text here. I'm going to try to think about this passage here. So every conscious representation has both a form, this is Kant, right, and a matter or content. Actually, I was intrigued by this thing here, like this or. Is it like one or the other? Actually, it's both, right? But depends on the case, not necessarily. Anyways, I still take this passage into consideration. The matter or sensation is the qualitative phenomenal element, or what's now called qualia. They are intrinsic, non-relational properties of conscious representations. So the matter or sensation, the qualitative phenomenal element. Seems like to be a straight answer to my question, right? And then, qualia. So they are like qualia freaks, right? Kant is a qualia freak, that's surprising. And then I go, conscious representations are necessarily accompanied by sensations, understood as the effect of an object on the capacity for representation. So, any conscious representation, necessarily, that's a strong, accompanied by these things, the matter, sensation. And those things are the effect of certain outer object, an outer capacity, right, for representation. So, I'm going to just kind of get all these things together, and then I'm going to try to give my interpretation. The content, inhalt, is the intentional content, or what the experience is about, or a package of information about something, an X. Am I alone in finding these things puzzling? I mean, I really do. I really want to talk to Kantians to see what it actually means. So, the content is the intentional content. So, remember, we had this matter or content. This thing here seems to be the intentional thing, matter, sensation, effect of an object in our capacity to representation. But it's not actually the same thing as, the intentional content, which is something else, this inhalt. The intentional content of a conscious representation can be held fixed while varying its representational character, and the representational character can also be held fixed while varying its intentional content. So as far as I understood it, here comes the embarrassing thing. Intentional content, the inhalt, cannot fix the phenomenal character because they vary independently, right? There is no interesting relation here that can actually ground one thing or another. So they can vary independently. This seems to be substantively different from the representationalist view. So I was like, yeah, Kant is definitely not a contemporary representationalist. And now, obviously, when I realized that, I tried to see the motivations, right, for his view. And then things go really more difficult, I think. I'm happy, it seems like I got the first part right. So, after all, what explains the phenomenal character of perceptual experience, right? What? And then I have this. Because certainly it's not intentional content. Or content, in Kant speak, in Haupt, actually. Imagination is a necessary ingredient of perception itself. It has been believed that the senses not only supply impressions, but also connect them so as to yield mental images of objects. For that purpose, something more is undoubtedly required, namely a function for the synthesis of them. And the second passage, both passages from, First critique. Experience is, beyond all doubt, the first product that our understanding brings forth as it works on the raw material of sensible sensations. So the imagination, or some sort of lower level synthesis or productive operation of our cognition, seems also required to produce full-fledged perceptual phenomenology. And why do I say that? Because it's necessary to wield this, what he calls mental images. In some other passage, there is this thing about sensations. They don't even have, properly speaking, objects. You have these proto-objects. So I can't really, and since there is nothing in this very basic level, there is some qualia, right? The sensations, nothing intentionally interesting to explain this, the phenomenal character. And then the whole structure of perception seems to be given by this working of imagination. So I can't really make much sense of what this initial equality is, since most of the way we see the world perceptually, we perceive the world, seems to be necessarily, I say, or just kind of to include all these things here. Otherwise, I can't really make much sense of what this phenomenology looks like. So the imagination, or some sort of lower level synthesis, blah, 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 seems required as well. So you have this empirical, very basic, raw sensation comes in, imagination, and then the phenomenology of perceptual experience. Well, here is a passage. It's a bit long, but I have to go through that because that's key to what I'm trying to detect here. The kind of the 5 steps of the synthetic process, right? Like synthesizing the raw material that comes to this faculty. It's not actually a faculty, you say, whatever imagination is. So first there is this, there are original inputs or impressions that trigger sensibility and give rise to sensations. So sensations here seems to be like just causally elicited by this, outer objects, just kind of triggering things, and it seems like to be very much totally subpersonal and seems to give information, I would say, in, my terms. Secondly, the sensations are synthesized apprehensionally and reproductively by the imagination in order to give rise to outputs that both include blind or indistinct empirical intuitions and also mental images, both lacking determinate internal representational structure. So, interesting. Second level. So we are moving forward here, right? Now the input is the output of the first level, right? Sensations. And now you have like this 2 different, I take it to be parallel synthesis, because you can go either way, right? And they give rise to this output here. That is still like blind, indistinct, empirical intuitions, lacking determinate representational structure. As you can see, like we are now going to the 3rd step here. Given the way we representationalists understand perceptual content, right, or representational content, I can't make much sense so far to this notion, right? I can't really find a place for this notion. It's not even structured, right? Not in the way that it must be, like as a candidate for truth or falsity or things like that. At least as okay, we're going to talk later. Thirdly, intuitions and images are further recognitionally synthesized using empirical schemata by the understanding in order to generate empirical concepts as outputs. So now, I think we definitely move to conceptual level. We have empirical concepts. Of course, the empirical thing has to do with things, the inputs, things that came from the lower levels. But now you have the word here that's relevant. It's not proto or quasi, it's concept, right? So now we have concepts as outputs. And then complexes of intuitionally funded empirical concepts synthesized by imagination, using transcendental schemata, and the understanding using pure concepts or categories in order to generate, now the output is fully structured judgments of experience. So now things, it's not only you have concepts, but you have like judgments. And then higher order necessary a priori judgments generated that either express or immediately depend upon transcendental capacities, ingredient in the generation of judgments of experience. I'm not going to talk about this last level. I mean, I'm interested in whatever I'm looking for. It must be somewhere before that, way before actually. Now it's kind of, you're making judgments, you're thinking, right? I'm talking about perception. So, just one more passage here. The causal process triggering sensibility deriving from an external source is affection. Affection involves sensation, which is an internal representational manifolds consisting in a successive series of qualia. Sensations are not objects of consciousness. Instead, they are only adverbial, qualitative features of consciousness. Well, I see a lot of stuff back in this passage, and a lot of stuff really. So here, let's kind of bring some of that stuff to your attention here. So initially, causal process is triggering sensibility, and this is affection. It involves sensation. It seems like to come along as just successive series of qualia. But sensations, this thing that comes along with this informational, thing that's coming in, not objects of consciousness. So it's definitely, it's not the thing you were aware of or the object of a perception. Qualia, right? So they are taken here to be just as adverbial qualitative features. Alright, so the first step, raw sensations are completely or very much unstructured. Or unstructured to a degree that I can't really understand how to talk about content in the sense that we talk about. I'm going to end. I have like 2 slides now. So if perceptual phenomenology is fixed by this kind of stuff, so we definitely can't explain the fact that phenomenal properties come already associated to the objects. So here's, this is an argument that Michael Tai used in the 90s when he rejected his own adverbalist theory. So he was formerly a defender of adverbalist theory of perception, and then he rejected his theory, mainly based in this argument, which is, suppose you see like a red circle to the left of a blue square, so that's normalized your phenomenal experience, and you can just kind of feed your system with just a bunch of properties, colors and shapes, but the color must be like this linked to the circle, right? It's a circle that is round, right? Not a square. And it's to the left, not to the right. So things there must be structure, whatever is feeding in your system. And that's why it makes sense to look for the veridicality conditions of perception, because since they are structured in such a way, there is a way of getting things wrong, right? Oh, you got an illusion, right? You misrepresented a certain property of the object or whatever. So unless it's structured to this, at least in this very basic sense of properties linked to on objects and objects located in relation to others, right? I can't just kind of fit imagination with all this bunch of unstructured things and expect it to later on attribute the right properties to the right things, right? It's just kind of, it must be an empirical data. It must come in, right? If the structure is just kind of coming top down, I don't know how you can actually make this difference, right? Unless you explain the very basic level of what comes in or fits your whole system here as being already structured, at least in this very basic level, right? So I think now we can kind of I reach my kind of very tentatively criticism of something I think I found in what Hanna says is Kant's view on that. So in the lowest level, they're sensibly clear but indistinct representations, clear because the liver is individual sensible, an individual object, yet indistinct, lacks internal differentiation, resolution. And so this passage here, so early childhood was the time not of experience but merely of scattered perceptions, not yet unified under the concept of an object. Scattered. I'm trying to kind of visualize what does the scattered perceptions look like. Is it a bunch of properties, but they must be located in relation to one another, or just kind of, what is it, right? This it is obviously just kind of the result of this successive series of qualia, right? But what does it look like anything? I'm not saying that infants are going to recognize things as, table as a table or whatever, but are they going to see like the property linked to this thing here, or just kind of scattered all around, right? The sensory cognition of animals is also clear yet indistinct, object directed yet neither conceptual nor propositional. This is another passage here. So again, this proto-cognition shared by infants, animals, and humans is some sort of non-propositional scattered perceptions. So, I'm not going to... I had all these other things to say about emptiness, but I'm kind of glad I'm not going to go through that, because that's actually even more complicated to kind of calibrate my views with Kant's. But at least at this point here, there is this huge effort to say that Kant defends non-conceptual content. And then I was trying to see what that content is. And as a representationalist, actually those are the people you mentioned as like the contemporary tradition of non-conceptualists, right? Hayek, Gradsky, all these people. And this non-propositional thing that I found in Kant is definitely not the same thing we are talking about. It's not, because it's it becomes conceptual much before it can actually give what we want from perceptual content. In a sense, whatever we call perceptual experience, it seems like to have a conceptual content in Kant's view, because whatever is called here non-conceptual is not yet contentful to start with. So it's not even content in our sense. When it becomes content, as like actually explaining the phenomenology of experience, what is cognitively given to think, and all that. It's already conceptual. So that was my impression, right? I'm not sure I'm making much sense of it. Maybe you guys can enlighten me now, because really I'm looking forward to it. Let me see, there was something else now. I know people are tired, so I'm not going to go through the other stuff. And I'm not going to talk about the empty intuitions. So thank you very much.